She put it in writing. She named the fraud. They buried the letter. In August 2001, a senior vice president at Enron Corporation wrote a letter to her chairman. The letter was 7 pages. It described, in specific detail, how Enron had been using accounting techniques to hide billions of dollars in losses, how the deception was becoming impossible to sustain, and how the company was, in her words, an accounting scandal away from implosion. She named the structures. She named the risks. She gave him everything he needed to understand exactly what was happening. The chairman's name was Ken Lay. The vice president's name was Sharon Watkins. Lay handed the letter to Enron's lawyers. The lawyers advised him to do nothing. For months later, Enron filed for bankruptcy. $74 billion was gone, and 20,000 people lost everything. To understand Enron, you need to understand what it had convinced the world it was. Enron began as a relatively conventional natural gas pipeline company, formed in 1985 through the merger of 2 regional pipeline operators in Houston. It owned physical infrastructure, the pipes that moved gas across the country, and its revenues came from fees for using that infrastructure. It was a utility. It was boring. And then Jeff Skilling arrived and decided to make it something else entirely. Skilling joined Enron in 1990 after a career at McKinsey, the management consulting firm, and brought with him a set of ideas about how energy companies could be transformed from physical infrastructure operators into financial trading businesses. His central insight, which was genuinely innovative at the time, was that energy commodities like natural gas and electricity could be traded the way financial instruments were traded, with Enron acting not just as a pipeline owner, but as a market maker, a risk manager, and a financial intermediary between buyers and sellers of energy across the country and eventually the world. The trading business that Skilling built at Enron was, in its early years, real and valuable. Enron developed sophisticated models for pricing energy contracts, managing risk, and creating new financial products that genuinely helped energy producers and consumers manage their exposure to price volatility. The company attracted brilliant quantitative analysts and traders who believed they were building something new. And in the early 1990s, they were. The problem was not the idea. The problem was what happened when the idea stopped generating enough profit on its own and Skilling decided to supplement reality with fiction. And here is the moment that everything changed. Enron had lobbied regulators successfully to allow it to use mark-to-market accounting for its long-term energy contracts, a method that allowed the company to book the entire estimated future profit of a contract immediately upon signing it, rather than recognizing revenue as the contract was actually performed over time. In the hands of honest management, mark-to-market accounting is a legitimate tool. In the hands of Enron's management, it became a machine for manufacturing earnings. When Enron signed a 20-year energy contract, it could book whatever profit it estimated the contract would generate over 20 years. Today, in this quarter's earnings, even if those estimates were wildly optimistic, and even if the contract would never actually generate that profit, the reported earnings were real in the sense that they appeared in the financial statements. The cash behind them was not. Skilling was named CEO in February 2001, with Ken Lay moving to the role of chairman. By that point, Enron had been named Fortune magazine's most innovative company in America for 6 consecutive years. Its stock price had reached $90 per share. Analysts who questioned Enron's accounting were publicly dismissed and professionally marginalized. The company had created an atmosphere in which skepticism about its numbers was treated not as appropriate financial scrutiny, but as a failure of vision, an inability to understand how fundamentally Enron had changed the rules of business. The mechanism that sustained Enron's reported earnings, beyond the mark-to-market accounting that inflated contract values, was a network of off-balance sheet entities that Enron's CFO, Andrew Fastow, created and managed. These entities, which Fastow gave names like LJM Cayman and Raptor, served 2 primary purposes. First, they allowed Enron to transfer assets that were losing value off its balance sheet, so that the losses did not appear in Enron's financial statements. Second, they provided apparent hedges for Enron's own investments, structures that looked like genuine risk management arrangements, but were in reality circular transactions in which Enron was effectively guaranteeing its own positions through entities it controlled. Fastow had constructed these entities with the involvement of major financial institutions, including Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, and Merrill Lynch that provided financing and, in some cases, participated in transactions whose true nature was obscured by their complexity. The banks that helped structure these arrangements later paid significant settlements to resolve allegations that they had knowingly assisted Enron in misleading investors. The complexity of the structures was not incidental. It was the product of deliberate design, transactions engineered to be opaque enough that Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor, could sign off on them as technically compliant with accounting rules while their economic substance was fundamentally deceptive. And here is the part that should make anyone who followed business news in 2000 and 2001 deeply uncomfortable. The questions were being asked, not loudly, not by people with the platform to be heard, but they were there. A Bethany McLean article in Fortune magazine in March 2001 asked simply, "How exactly does Enron make its money?" The question was direct, and the answers Enron provided were evasive. Skilling called McLean on the phone and told her the article was unethical. The article ran anyway, and the financial community largely moved on, because Enron's stock was still rising and because the company's public relations machine had been so effective at framing skeptics as people who simply didn't understand the new rules of the new economy. The new rules, it turned out, were the old rules in disguise. Revenue that did not exist. Losses that were hidden in structures nobody was allowed to examine. Executives who were enriching themselves from those same structures. Fasto later admitted to making over $30 million personally from the LJM entities he managed, while presenting to the public the image of a company creating value for shareholders. The institutional investors who owned Enron stock, pension funds, mutual funds, retirement accounts, were being systematically deceived by a system that had been built, piece by piece, to ensure that the deception was as difficult as possible to detect from the outside. The system worked until the stock price started falling. As Enron stock declined in mid-2001, partly because of the broader technology sector downturn and partly because the market was beginning to sense something was wrong without being able to articulate exactly what, the off-balance sheet structures that had been designed to protect Enron's reported earnings began to unravel. The hedges that were supposed to protect Enron's investments were backed by Enron's own stock. As the stock fell, the hedges became worthless, and the losses that the structures were supposed to conceal began to emerge. Here is what most people never learn about Sharon Watkins. She did not go to regulators. She did not go to the press. She went to Ken Lay, the man who had the most to lose from listening. And she did it anyway. Stay with me. October 16, 2001. Enron announced a third-quarter loss of $618 million and disclosed, for the first time publicly, the existence of the off-balance sheet structures that had been hiding its real financial position. The announcement also disclosed that the structures had reduced shareholders' equity by $1.2 billion. The market's reaction was swift and devastating. Enron stock fell sharply. Analysts who had been praising the company's innovation were suddenly confronted with a balance sheet they did not recognize and disclosures they could not interpret. The SEC launched a formal investigation within days. Enron's management, led by Ken Lay, attempted to manage the crisis through public statements, analyst calls, and assurances that the company remained fundamentally sound. The statements did not hold. Each new disclosure revealed additional problems. The off-balance sheet structures were more extensive and more damaging than the initial announcements had suggested. The losses that had been concealed were larger than investors had been told. Skilling had already resigned as CEO in August 2001, just 6 months after being appointed, and just days after Watkins had written her letter to Lay, citing personal reasons. His departure, which had seemed puzzling at the time, now appeared in a different light. The man who had built the trading business and championed the accounting innovations that sustained it had left before the collapse arrived. Lay had resumed the CEO role and was now the public face of an institution in freefall. November 2001. Enron's credit rating was cut to junk. Banks that had been providing credit lines withdrew them. A proposed merger with Dynegy, which would have provided a lifeline, collapsed when Dynegy's due diligence team got a closer look at Enron's actual financial position and walked away. The company that had been worth $68 billion at its stock price peak was now worth almost nothing. December 2, 2001. Enron filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. At the time, it was the largest bankruptcy in American history, surpassing the previous record that had been set just 8 months earlier by someone else. That record would itself be broken 7 months later by WorldCom. The week that Enron collapsed was, in the history of American corporate fraud, unlike any other. 20,000 employees showed up to work that week knowing their jobs were ending. Many of them also knew, that same week, that the retirement savings they had been encouraged to invest in Enron stock were now worth a fraction of what they had been the year before. The pension plans that covered the company's hourly workers had been heavily invested in Enron shares, shares that the company's own executives had been selling quietly for months while encouraging employees to hold. The week of the collapse, many employees discovered that they were locked out of their retirement accounts during a blackout period that prevented them from selling their Enron shares. The stock continued to fall. The window to escape closed before they could reach it. Charles Prestwood had worked for Enron and its predecessor companies for 33 years. He had started as a pipe fitter, the kind of physical infrastructure worker that Enron's original gas pipeline business had depended on, and had spent 3 decades building a career that entitled him, by the time he retired, to a pension. That pension, at its peak value in 2001, was worth approximately $1.3 million. It was invested heavily in Enron stock, as the company had encouraged its employees to do, and as many of them had done because Enron stock had performed so well for so long that it seemed like the safest investment available. When Enron collapsed, Charles Prestwood's pension was worth $1,200. He lost $1,298,800 in the space of weeks. He was 63 years old. Prestwood testified before the Senate in February 2002, 3 months after the bankruptcy. He was calm and dignified. He described what 33 years of work had been worth at its peak and what it was worth after Enron collapsed. He said he had trusted the company because it had been trustworthy for 3 decades. He did not rage. He simply described what had happened in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who has processed something too large for anger and arrived at a kind of exhausted clarity. His testimony put a human face on what the financial press was describing in billions, and it was his face, not the numbers, that people remembered. The total retirement savings lost by Enron employees in the collapse was estimated at approximately $2 billion. 20,000 jobs were eliminated. The communities around Enron's operations in Houston and elsewhere absorbed losses that went far beyond the financial statements. The suppliers, the restaurants, the small businesses that had depended on Enron's workforce, all of them felt the collapse in ways that did not appear in any regulatory filing. The legal consequences for the executives most responsible were significant but imperfect. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, reduced from 10 years in exchange for cooperation that was instrumental in the prosecution of Skilling and Lay. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted in May 2006 on 19 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading, and sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. That sentence was later reduced to 14 years following a legal settlement. He was released in 2019. Ken Lay was convicted on 6 counts of fraud and conspiracy in the same trial. He died in July 2006, before sentencing, from a heart attack at his vacation home in Colorado. His conviction was vacated following his death under a legal doctrine that prevents posthumous punishment. Arthur Andersen, Enron's auditor, was convicted of obstruction of justice for shredding documents related to the Enron audit. The conviction effectively ended the firm. No major corporation would retain an auditor under criminal indictment, and one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world ceased to exist. The conviction was later overturned by the Supreme Court on a technicality, but by then Arthur Andersen was already gone. The firm that had signed off on Enron's accounts for years paid the ultimate price. Its partners and staff, most of whom had nothing to do with the Enron audit, lost their careers along with the guilty ones. Before we finish, drop one word in the comments. Sharon Watkins went to Ken Lay instead of regulators or the press. If she had gone public immediately, would Enron have collapsed sooner? And would fewer people have lost their savings? One word. Yes or no. I read every single one. Charles Prestwood lost $1.3 million he spent 33 years earning. The next CEO we're covering stole directly from people just like him, and he did it for decades. Subscribe.